So welcome everyone to the workshop today on how to talk to your legislator. This is Wayne Niederhauser, a former legislator, served in the Senate here in Utah from 2008 to 2006 to 2018. Served as Senate President for 6 of those years. Spent a lot of time working with constituents. Look forward to having a discussion today on how to talk to your legislator. The format that we'll be using is more of a discussion, and our panelists, Senator Escamilla, always want to say Robles, so sorry, Senator Escamilla and Representative Eliason, hopefully will be joining us here soon. He's in Florida today, but we'll be having some discussion. First of all, I just want to introduce you to Senator Escamilla. Her and I probably worked the whole time together that I was in the Senate. And what an awesome person. She's probably just a prime example of how you work with your constituents. I know that she does a lot of outreach, has a lot of discussions with people that elect her and people even that don't elect her that are outside her district. And you know, we, obviously politics play a big part of things in the legislature, Republican, Democrat. But one of the things that we tried to do in the Senate over the years was to kind of bridge some of those political barriers. So the senator and I were often in press availability after the session. We did it together as Republicans and Democrats. And of course, you know, the Republicans have a super majority in the legislature, but we made a conscious effort to bridge sometimes those political divides so that all voices were heard. And I know that a lot of that happens in the House too. We've got Representative Eliason now online. And I look at some of the committees that you're on, Senator. You've served in social services. You're the minority whip. So you a leader in the minority party. I know you serve social services. I saw that you're on revenue taxation, then all the leadership committees. You're on all of those. And Representative Eliason is a CPA by profession. Serves as the board of the trustee chair for the road home.
That was many years ago. I'm just
okay.
For now. Yeah.
So very familiar with homeless services. One of the the leaders on homeless services in the legislature. Because of your CPA background, I see that you on revenue and taxation, but have been heavily involved in criminal justice issues and social service issues. So welcome from Florida, and we appreciate you being here today. So I thought maybe we just each take a few moments and talk about some of the things that you see are effective for you and people communicating with you as an elected official. And Senator Robles or Senator Escamilla, let's start with you.
Thank you, President. And once a president, you're always a president. So it's exciting for the opportunity to continue to work with you in your new capacity. And you're right, I got elected in 2008 into the Senate. And so I had a chance to work with you during your time in the Senate and your time as president. And I'll just add that you're absolutely right. I think we see a lot of Washington, D.C. scenarios of politics and legislative processes, but Utah is pretty unique on how we work together and how for 94% of the times to 95% of the times we're voting together, meaning we went through a very lengthy process of policymaking and policy, public policy processes and we get to a point where we agree with the vast majority of legislators. And that's most of the time. You obviously have some issues that are potentially more, where there is probably more division. Some politically ideology comes into place, but that's not the majority. And I always start that conversation where people's like, it must be terrible to be a super minority. And I'm like, it's not perfect, but it's not terrible. I mean, we work with what we have, and we appreciate, I think, the opportunity to bring policy conversation solutions into the table and be part of the muddling through of public policy, even if we are the minority. So I think our system and our process is set up so we can have conversations. Sometimes they're very difficult conversations. Homelessness is one of them, where we may not necessarily agree on all the solutions. I think we want the same outcome. And that is something that needs to be recognized. So in my experience as a legislator, just starting conversations from, your own individual districts, which for me, I represent the Northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City. So all west of I-15, all that Northwest quadrant, Salt Lake City, and about a big portion to half of West Valley City, all the way to Magna. We are seeing a very different experience of homelessness that maybe have someone that represents Sandy or Draper, or other parts of the state. In rural areas, there's a very different experience. At the same time, we recognize that it's a state issue. I think that was something, it took us some time to get as a legislature to say, we own this piece as well, and we will be partners with our local government and municipalities to find solutions. I think that was one of the best things that happened in the last, 7 years in the state legislature. That wasn't necessarily what we were even 15 years ago or 10 years ago. So, but that took place because people were very vocal. There was a lot of public engagement, and the Utah legislature is not shy of getting those conversations happening. So one of the things I will just add to my part as we start this conversation is rule number one of engaging with legislators is certainly the point of respect and trust. It doesn't matter if it's, you think, oh, well, I'm just here as a constituent, we're in one small issue. Just know that I think for every legislator, and I have the utmost respect to the 103 members, plus myself, but the 104 members of the legislature, that they're there because they care. I may not agree with them all the time, so we may agree to disagree, but there's a full commitment to moving the state forward, and they care because that's where they live in that community. That's where their children or their grandkids are growing up, and they want the state to be better. They want their community to be better. So when we engage with constituents, we expect respect back, right? And have that conversation. We are generalists as legislators. We are not, we know a little bit of a lot of things. We are dealing with a lot of issues at the same time. And we're a part-time legislature. We're what we call a citizen legislature, which is exciting. You have people that have full-time jobs on the side, and they are maybe experts on that piece, but they know a little bit of everything else. So we rely heavily on our experts, our public employees or local government employees, our teachers, our doctors, scientists, everybody else that's in the workforce in the issues that we're discussing. So we trust that they're coming in good faith, like we are, I think, coming in good faith to find solutions. So I will say, as a one, small point is just know that when you're engaging with that legislator, whether it's your own legislator, I think that's very important that you disclose, hey, I'm your constituent, and I want to talk to you about something, but you can talk to other legislators as well. I mean, I see them to be very open and to listening. Be just upfront. I mean, let them know, look, I'm coming with this experience or this expertise, and this is my point of view, and just be respectful that that legislator may just have a different experience, a different point of view, but it doesn't mean we cannot find consensus in that process. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Eliason.
Thank you, President. Just for the record, I'm not in Florida on vacation. I'm here for the National Conference of State legislature's annual meeting. So trying to get some tips on how to be more effective and a better legislator. Thank you, Senator Escamilla. She's a great colleague and always good to work with, great to work with, and appreciate her passion for the issues of homelessness and mental health. So in terms of how to work with your legislator, how to communicate and share what's on your mind, I think what one comment Senator Escamilla made was it's always important to let people know where you're coming from. Even when a lobbyist approached me, start talking about an issue, I like to ask him, who are you representing on this issue? And just so I have the perspective, happy to talk to anybody. One thing that's most powerful for me is if the individual I'm speaking with is a constituent. Next would probably then be a subject matter expert. And, then it would be, probably any other citizen of the state. And then, I guess lastly, a citizen of the United States. I'll get emails from all over the world. And, but if a constituent will put in the subject line of an email or in the text they send me something that says, I'm a constituent, I live in your district, that's definitely got my attention. Now, one thing that I try to live by this, and it's very helpful when communicating with your legislator or elected officials. Of course, stating the problem is critical and why it needs to be addressed. But it's always most helpful if when somebody brings a problem, or an issue, they can then come with a recommended solution. And to the extent that they can think through that solution in terms of what is this going to cost, what type of political considerations do we need to consider, how feasible is it? I know that's what legislators get paid to do, but if you want a better chance at getting the idea, passed as a bill or considered as an appropriation, thinking through those things can be very helpful. It's actually a similar format to the meetings I'm attending here at this conference, where they'll spend a fair amount of time, typically most of the time during a breakout session discussing an issue, and then you wait till the very end is to hear what are the policy recommendations, how practical are they? And so if again a constituent comes to me, can share the issue with me and then say, here's hopefully a list of policy options in terms that could be pursued. And even if they don't know what the costs are, that we have staff that can figure those things out, then that's very helpful. I think from a constituent or stakeholder perspective, simply asking the legislator, what is your opinion on this issue? This is the proverbial seek first to understand, then be understood. Because sometimes when you understand, this goes for any conversation, in my opinion, if you understand the other person's point of view, where they're coming from, their own life experiences, then that can better maybe help inform your decision and how you respond. That's one great thing about the legislature is that when you're sitting on a committee or on the floor, you have to listen to new ideas and different perspectives. And a lot of times I learn something. And sometimes it changes, my paradigm, my viewpoint. And being willing to do that and know what areas that you can compromise and still live with is critical. Because if everybody thinks they're going to get everything they want, all the time, obviously that's just not the case. And, unfortunately, we kind of see on the national level, people so far apart and this lack of ability to compromise, and then everybody just gets frustrated. So coming up with, ideas that are practical, both, from a fiscal perspective and a political perspective, I think is kind of the recipe for best success. Now, in terms of logistics of contacting your legislator, there's this hierarchy of, I'd say good, better, best. And I would say, good is an email or snail mail, snail mail, meaning United States Postal Service, I shouldn't say. Sending a letter through the mail is acceptable. Email would be better. It's a little bit more timely. A text message is even better. And again, always identifying, who you are and who you represent. And best would be in the category of a verbal conversation, whether that's simply by phone or today, it's obviously difficult sometimes to have face-to-face conversations, but if you're able to meet with them face-to-face, then I would say that's best. And obviously we have to work through the logistics of what we have to work through in these difficult times. But anyway, that's, I think probably the last thing is, letting the legislator know why is this important to you? A lot of times people have, their own personal stories behind, something why it's important. And if they're a lobbyist and that they're just getting, compensated to share the message, then that's fine. I understand and appreciate the role of lobbyists, especially if they're well informed. But just knowing, why is this important to you is for me is really good to know. So those are some of the best practices I've found. And I approached somebody recently with a policy concern issue, and I laid it out and I said, but I'm not wanting just to dump this problem on your lap. I have a recommended solution that I think will require both sides to do some compromise, but I think that it's the art of the doable, which is sometimes lost, too often in today's hyper political climate. So those are some of my perspectives.
Thank you, Representative. A couple of things that I would like to just talk about and how to approach your legislator. And by the way, participants, please start asking any questions you have. This is going to be kind of a discussion for the next 40 minutes, us talking back between each other and answering questions that you have. So please start asking the questions that you have for us regarding this subject. But I just want to point out a couple of things. First of all, you as a constituent, wherever you live, will have you'll see issues that the state addresses, and you'll hear about legislators from all across the state. And sometimes you wonder what's going through their head and why they're addressing that issue, and it doesn't make sense to you. But I can assure you, having served there and served as a Senate president and been able to see this from that position, is that the people that are elected are generally a profile of the constituents that elected them. And they have been elected by those people to represent them. And so we're going to have the view of 75 House districts represented in the legislature. We're going to have the view of 29 Senate districts represented in the legislature. And we bring those things together and having an understanding that different constituencies have some different points of view, and their legislator is representing them, is just an important element here in understanding why sometimes we address the issues that we address. And having the respect and understanding is very important. Also, some of the things that, and maybe the first thing I ought to say is, do each of you know who your legislator is? And I trust that many of you do, but I suspect that some of you don't. And if you don't know, you need to get to know who they are. So go to the website, le.utah.gov. That's the legislative website, or you can just Google Utah legislature. And on there is a profile of every legislator. You'll know what committees they're on. You know if they're a leader in a leadership position. There's a little bit of a bio there, and you can get a lot of information. There's contact information there on that website. And know that, while legislators are, very astute people. They're not extraordinary, out of this world people. They're down to earth people, just like your neighbor. And most are very approachable. And that was a hard thing for me when I was, before I was in the legislature, because that position is sometimes a little intimidating. And I felt intimidated. I was asked to come and speak at a committee meeting. This was probably about 5 or 6 years before I was in the legislature, and I was scared to death to sit before a committee and with people that are probably seasoned in debate, know the issues very well. And so I felt uncomfortable just because I didn't understand. But now today, knowing that these are real people, they have, they're having challenges, they're having successes, just like most of the people in the district they represent. They're good people. And if you understand that, then it's, I think that a legislator is a little more approachable. And today, to sit before a committee, I know I've had a lot of experience doing that. It's not intimidating at all. In fact, it's kind of fun at times. But just understanding a little bit better, knowing who your legislator is, knowing what committees they are on, you'll actually be able to see what bills during the session that they're sponsoring. You can look at how they voted on a bill. It's a very robust website. Get to know that website. That's a critical, that's a key informational resource for you. And then Representative Eliason and I and Representative Spenlove used to have town hall meetings together. And since I've been gone from the legislature, you still do that, don't you, Representative?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay. So they've continued that on. But almost every year that I was in the legislature, I had town hall meetings during the legislative session. And that gives people an opportunity to come to a place when we're in the heat of the moment during the legislative session. And I wanted to be able to answer the hard questions and to get to know people. And so when there's those kind of opportunities and you can go to them, go to the town hall meeting. That's where you're going to learn a lot. That's where you're going to get to know your legislator. I sent out a newsletter every week during the legislative session and about monthly when we were not in session. And so if if you have an opportunity to get on their email list so you can get their newsletter, do that, because you're going to get a lot of information. You're going to kind of get to know more about what's important and what your legislator is working on. So there's that. And then, having a face-to-face visit with a legislator at some point is really good, because that's where you get to know someone. But most legislators will say, don't hesitate to call or to email. That was, what I did when I was in the legislature. I know that the senator and representative here both have that. They're very approachable and have always been. And then the other point I wanted to make, and then we'll go to some questions here, is that it's important to realize that when legislators are in the general session, I know it's the heat of the moment and that's the time you really want to reach out to them. but it's the most difficult time for a legislator to respond to you because they're getting hundreds of email a day. And so if at all possible, I don't discourage you to reach out to your legislator during the session. That's an important point. But if you have a chance to address whatever issue or you want to approach them about a question, if there's any chance to do that when they're not in session, you're going to have a lot, the response time, the attention is going to be greater because they have more time and they're not drinking from the fire hose of the general session. You know, there's 500 plus bills and a multi-billion-dollar budget that they're working on during that time. Anyway, those are just a couple of thoughts that I've had. Any response, Senator Representative, to that?
No, and that's great. I think I will just add, you know, there's just some kind of like bullet points of things that you want to do. Like one, get used to the website, right? That's a great tool. Like you mentioned, President, make sure that when you're addressing a legislator, that you actually know who that legislator is. I mean, it's a little bit comical when people confuse us, and maybe there's some of us that look alike to somebody else, but it's weird, right? I mean, you're walking and they're talking to you. It's like, oh, Representative this. I'm like, oh, that's not me. I'm like, sorry, that's not me. So, you know, it may be a good way to break the ice, I guess, but it's a little bit awkward. So just get the right name. The pronunciation is fine. You know, my last name is pretty weird, so I get it. But, you know, just attempting to like, hey, you've done your homework, right, on the issue. You're coming with just, you know, solutions during interim, like the president said, during session, you're just addressing the bills that are coming your way. We review about close to 1,000 of them. We pass about 500 of them. Just, this is only in 7 weeks. I mean, it's like fire coming so fast, and we balance a $22 billion budget. So that is fast paced, meeting after meeting. I mean, just to get an idea, the Senate Democrats, the 6 of us serve on all the committees. So our senators in our caucus are literally in committee from 8 in the morning to 5 p.m. at a minimum, no matter what happens, because we don't have enough members of our caucus. So we're rotating every committee, which is a unique thing to our Senate Democrats. So just keep that in mind to respond. Sometimes text works better in the middle of a session because it may be hard to take the phone and call back. I think there's a pretty known fact that people prioritize their constituents. You know, those are people that get you elected. They're the ones that you have to meet every time you're knocking on doors. They're constituents. So your priority goes constituency, of course. When you're working on issues, there's different stakeholders. And I think Representative Eliason mentioned some of them that become, you know, part of a conversation due to expertise or experience. Many of us have, I think, run legislation based on experiences. Some are tragic experiences that people bring issues to the legislature and we address them. And those are difficult, but you integrate with all of them. And I know there were some questions that are coming that the president will facilitate, but I think more than anything is, you know, we're all humans, and like the president said, we can't, you know, not 100%, but I think most of my colleagues are very approachable and they want to hear and listen to others. But I always give this example, you may have, and this happened at the Capitol a lot, right? You're coming out of a committee where your bill just got killed, right? You work hard for 9 months, your bill dies, you literally are ready to cry. In my case, I'm a crybaby, so I'm ready to cry. And you're walking out and someone jumps and it's like, hey, we need to talk about this. And you may not be in the best stage, you know, and you're like sad, like the bill just died. You may need a minute, and just keep that in mind. I mean, it's a fast pace, you know, responsibility and job, and it's okay. We sign for that, but we all are humans at the end of the day.
Any other thoughts, Representative?
Yeah, there's another, Senator Escamilla touched on this, but there's an app called Bill Watch. Bill Watch has a kind of just a image of the state capitol on it. if you're involved in the legislative process and, this is the step after you've convinced, your legislator to run a bill, or if there's a bill you don't like and you want to show up to testify against it and, talk to the committee members, the Bill Watch app is an invaluable tool. You can put your bills in there that you want to track, and you can see that bill through every step of the way, from the day it was numbered to when it got its fiscal note, to which committee it's assigned to. And I think it can even send you alerts. You have to double check on that one, but so that is a great tool, because sometimes people will show up, after the session and say, oh, we didn't like this bill or this component of this bill. And that's not a good time to complain about something that was in a bill after the session. Ideally in the committee, ideally you work out issues as the bill is, before it's drafted. But then a bill typically has 2 committee meetings, and then you can go to that committee and, share concerns or, suggestions how to improve that bill. I have several bills that I worked on for 3 years. They died 2 years in a row, and the proverbial third time was the charm. So it can be a lengthy process. And that's because I kept getting stakeholder feedback. And frankly, the bill just kept getting better. So using the technology that the legislatures made available to track legislation is something that I would strongly recommend.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read the first question here. We've got 3 questions, but let's address them one at a time. How do you balance engaging legislators professionally versus having a personal engagement? Sometimes my priorities on behalf of my organization may be different than my personal priorities. I don't know how to balance professional versus personal engagement. Any advice?
I saw that question. I thought it was an interesting question. First, when the president explained what information you can get of legislators in their bio and in the website, we also have a conflict of interest disclosure document, which I think it's important. We are what we call a citizen legislature, meaning we have our full-time jobs on the side. Even though being a senator is a full-time job, most of us, I will say maybe 98% of the legislators are still working. We certainly do not, it's hard to live on a legislator salary. And I think that's also a good conversation to have. But we have a disclosure, so you can see any conflict of interest of any legislator, meaning, so what they do, and we usually, many of us disclose them. I mean, the law says it has to be in writing and it has to be signed. It's an affidavit. You're being asked questions about you and your spouse, and that's fully disclosed. I think, to answer your question, as legislators, we're elected by our constituents. And we listen to our constituents, and our constituents will talk to us. And I know, legislators are, you're sometimes in instances where maybe your heart feels strongly about something, but your constituents are clear on where they are on the issue, or you're just now telling the numbers of constituents engagement. Just never underestimate constituent engagement as a way of persuading a legislator. So, and with that said, we also see kind of like you have to see the bigger picture. Every decision you make will have an impact. Your vote will impact the entire state of Utah. A decision made that will affect the entire state is not only for your district, but your district is always a priority. So that's a little bit of my answer to that question.
I'll take a shot at answering that question too. If I understood the question correctly, it's kind of a situation where when somebody's wearing 2 hats, how do they balance what they're talking about on behalf of their employer and what their own personal opinion might be? And if I misunderstood that, forgive me. But I find that it's always refreshing when somebody, again, just discloses kind of what hat they're wearing. They might say, I'm here on behalf of my employer and I want to talk about this issue. But it's not at all uncommon to say, okay, can I just talk to you as, a citizen? or as a constituent, whatever the case may be, and share their concerns on a particular issue. I've even had situations where a lobbyist will say, I want to talk to you about this issue. It's on behalf of my company, this is the issue. And then they'll switch into personal mode and say, personally, I don't agree with it, but I had to share the opinion of my client with you. And so I think just being transparent and full disclosure is always refreshing to at least to me, to know how somebody feels, and knowing that people have lots of different roles, and just knowing what perspective they're coming from when they share their thoughts or concerns with you.
And I agree in both regards, whatever way you look at that question, but just being upfront, being truthful is the best way to go. Next question. Why is talking about and coming to solutions on major societal issues such as homelessness such a struggle? Representative, you want to take that one?
Yeah,
it's kind of your wheelhouse, and I know it's both the senator and the representative's wheelhouse for sure.
Yeah, I saw that one in the Q&A and had a few minutes to think about that. I don't want this to sound trite, but the solutions are so difficult and complex because the underlying issues are extremely complex and multifactorial. So having worked on homelessness for a decade and a half, either in a voluntary or a legislative capacity, and in order to understand this, I've even gone and slept in the shelter and walked the streets and talked with the homeless and people experiencing homelessness. And when you look at the data, attend presentations like at the conference I am here today, hear personal, deeply touching stories, you realize, at least in the issue of homelessness, that this is often driven by sometimes intergenerational poverty. So often is driven by trauma in terms of adverse childhood experiences, domestic violence, and a very prevalent theme is underlying homelessness is mental illness. When I was a boy, I would think about homelessness, and I was the last child at home, and we had a big basement. And one time I looked at our family room, and I made an estimate of how many homeless people that I could fit into my parents' family room, orange shag carpet and all. And then I thought, I don't think my parents would go for this. And while I think my heart was in the right place, I had no clue as to the challenges that lead somebody into homelessness. And so, in addition to working on homelessness since I've been in the legislature, the other area I've spent significant time is in the realm of mental health. It started out in suicide prevention, and I still work in that area, but the world of mental health has so many different challenges, and there's huge issues in terms of insurance coverage, access, the number of providers for the number of people that need help. And so I think that the issues go very hand in hand. And so again, they're complex solutions, and there's, to use a proverbial term, there's no silver bullets. I wish there were. But we have to look at our criminal justice system. We can't arrest our way out of these issues. We have to look at our healthcare system. We have to look at the number of mental health providers and their willingness to work with these populations. We have to look closely at our correctional system. So often people coming out of our prisons and jails have underlying issues relating to mental health that keep them from being housed. Well, it's so much more complex than simply furnishing a place for somebody to live. This was driven home to me years ago at the road home when a couple that had been chronically homeless was placed in housing. The caseworker couldn't find them on a number of visits, and finally inquired with the neighbors, have you seen these two individuals? And they said, oh yeah, they hauled their mattress out of their apartment and they're living out behind the dumpster enclosure outside. And while that struck me as, curious,
knowing that if, somebody is experiencing psychosis and, different mental health issues, they may feel more safe outside. And so in that case, just providing, they had a home now, but that wasn't addressing their underlying issues. So this is what I will say is, if you have ideas that appear to be low-hanging fruit or simply a piece of the puzzle, I would love to hear about them. This is a realm where lots of brainstorming, lots of people coming together on a bipartisan collaborative basis is critical to continue and fix the litany of issues that lead people to homelessness. And of course, our goal is to help them step out of homelessness and back into our community. It's probably a longer answer than you wanted.
And I agree 100%, Representative. It's an amazing answer. Thank you for that.
Also another perspective here is, and I think you just need to understand, is that we're not experts on everything. And so especially if you're an expert or you work in the industry, I personally would appreciate your perspective. Now, having worked in this position now for 7 months and actually have visited a lot of providers and do outreach every Friday night. I've gotten to know a homeless community here in Salt Lake, and I've got to know stories. And so I'll completely admit that I didn't really have much of an understanding as a legislator with regards to homeless services. And so it becomes an educational issue, because those legislators are dealing with education, transportation, taxation, and a myriad of other issues. And this is just one issue that comes up every session. And so it's important that I think you understand that.
Hey, Wayne, I just want to add one more thing that I forgot.
Sure, yeah.
A very common theme in the homelessness realm are substance use disorders. We all are familiar with the opioid epidemic. I was visiting with experts on that issue last night, seeking additional options. And so looking at what treatment options we have for people with substance use disorders, a very good friend of mine was recently in the homeless realm because of a meth addiction. And that is very complex. And so I think we have to not just say housing, while that's important. We need to look at substance use disorders, alcoholism, domestic violence, and mental health if we really want to start making a dent in the homelessness issue. That's all I'll say about that for now. Thank you.
And just, President, just to add, I think part of the situation of where it gets complicated is addressing what we know as social determinants of health, which may even include issues related to disparities and achievement gaps and others that are part of the intergenerational poverty cycles. So when you're tackling an issue and you're just kind of like putting a Band-Aid without actually, making sure you're taking care of the wound, it makes it hard. So, you're just in what I call a revolving door within the issue. And I mean, it's been interesting to see the process of getting us to a place where now we're talking about the causes, right? The why we're here. Not only saying housing, just, let's put them in a housing situation. We're now talking about really, holistic and comprehensive case management, for example, which, you've mentioned, we've had this conversation before, President, where that was not even part of a conversation 10 years ago. Now we recognize that their populations are going to need extra support or substance abuse as defined, explained by Representative Eliason, where you have mental health and substance abuse, and you can put them in an amazing place, but if they're not being helped to address that component of mental health and substance abuse, then they're not going to succeed. So is getting us there that I think is the difficult part, because some people say, well, is their choice? I mean, then you get into those components and, when you don't have walkable communities or even safety, it's another issue. It's not the same to be a woman experiencing homelessness and a man experiencing homelessness when it comes to assault and safety. So you have all those moving targets, I think, of issues, and is coming to the table open-minded that there may be issues that you never thought about it. And then you have to address them as well.
All right, we'll go to the next question. How would you suggest, it's a great question, handling situations in which your legislators are completely unresponsive to your concerns?
I would say, it could happen that actually you do not agree at all with your elected official. There are other legislators that you may align more, and I think you mentioned that when you were introducing me, President. I have a lot of individuals that I work with that are constituents of somebody else, but they're part of the, they're in the state of Utah, and I engage with them on multiple issues, and I learn from them, and they're not necessarily per se experts on an area or lobbyists or anything. They are just concerned citizens, but they're taking the time to reach as many legislators as possible to elevate the issue they're working on. And in many of their instances, their own representatives are not engaged now. They necessarily agree with them. The other issue is that maybe they should run for office, and bring that perspective. And that's respectful too, right? I run for office because I didn't feel my community was being represented. And that was a big push for me to put myself out there, as uncomfortable as it is, and difficult as it is. I felt at that point when I attempted and I wasn't getting the response I needed, I decided to run for office.
It's a very, very good question. And so to kind of play off what Senator Escamilla said, you have to realize sometimes that your representative or senator are not the best positioned to sponsor a bill that you feel is important. And that's okay. There's no requirement that any legislation that we sponsor, originated from a constituent. And I was working with a member from the other side of the aisle just a few weeks ago on an issue we both felt passionate about. And this legislator was the one who brought the issue up. It was for one of this legislator's constituents. And I spoke with her and I said, do you want to run this bill, or do you want me to? I'm happy to either be your first sponsor or vice versa, because it came from your constituent and it's a really good idea. And she said, just with your background on this subject, I think you're, maybe better positioned to run this bill. And so I think that legislator can go to their constituent and say, look, my job is to try to get your issue addressed. And who gets the credit for it doesn't matter, as long as the issue gets addressed. And so if they're unresponsive in terms of not calling you back or responding to you, the one thing that's really important to know is it may not be intentional. The number, I think Senator Escamilla can attest to this. In the recent weeks, there have been times that I can literally watch my email scroll with emails coming in. We won't get into what that subject is about, but it's like a slow moving slot machine. I could just watch them come in, and they were all kind of, they weren't chain emails, extremely fewer for my constituents, but emails can get lost. Just last night, my wife, I was talking to her and she asked me a question. I'm like, I'm not sure what that's about. And she says, well, it's the text I sent you. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. So, and she's a constituent. So a friendly reminder, a phone call, just to make sure they know about it. That's important, because sometimes you might interpret the lack of response as I don't care about the issue. And I'm sure Senator Escamilla is far more responsive than I am, but sometimes between balancing our day job, our legislative job, our families, things can slip through the cracks. So just follow up. But again, then if they're like, well, right after I first got elected, somebody invited me out to lunch, presented an issue that they wanted me to run a bill on. And I'm like, oh, this was the issue that they wouldn't let Utah in the union for. And I'm like, I'm probably not going to run a bill to, well, in this case, legalize polygamy. And so I just had to explain to them, that I, why that was not an issue I wanted to tackle. And, in this case, I didn't really have another legislator recommend them to, but you find that legislators typically have areas of policy expertise, and seeking out who those people are and building a relationship with them, maybe keeping your own legislators informed that you're working with this other person on this issue, that is important. But yeah, if the proverbial fish or cut bait, if your legislator is not the best person or is unresponsive, you've got 103 other choices. So pursue the other options. And in a lot of cases, it's a better option because of, maybe they're in the leadership position or some political aspect, or frankly, I think the most important thing is they know something about the issue. Maybe they're a subject matter expert as much as they can be, and that they're passionate about it.
And I just might add that you might just take a little different approach. Show up at a town hall meeting, or just present it a little bit different. But the important part is to build a relationship. If you can build a relationship beforehand, you're going to get miles further when an issue does come up. Even if you don't have an issue, build the relationship, because someday you're going to need to be able to communicate. All right, so this is the next question is a little bit like the last one, but just a little bit different. It's listed for me. Question for Wayne Niederhauser. You mentioned that representatives are supposed to represent their constituents. However, there have been numerous occasions where constituents largely support one thing, but the representative has opposite personal feelings about the issue and chooses to vote with their own personal opinion versus that of their constituency. What would you say to that, and how can we honestly have more open and honest conversations if that's the method by which laws are getting passed or not getting passed? So I'll throw out my perspective on that. That's an exception based on my experience. There are times when there's been a personal issue and a legislator votes that way. But my experience with my colleagues is that they're generally representing their constituency. Now, it may not be your point of view in that district, your personal point of view, but we're hearing from a lot of people in the district. And I think that most generally legislators are trying to balance that. I know I did over the years, but there was an occasion when, because of information that I have that maybe my constituents don't have, or because of a personal issue, I may have voted another way, but that was an exception. Any other comments, Representative or Senator?
Yeah,
I mean,
I'll
yeah.
go ahead. Go, Senator. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna add, I think it's the beauty of the system is that if a constituency is upset, they will not reelect that person, right? I mean, but it could happen. I agree. I think if you count the number of years you've served and the number of votes you took, I always tell people, know that you live with those votes, and some of them there will always be in your head or in your heart. There's some difficult votes where you can say both ways. Either it was because there's not a single bullet solution, because there are complexities behind it. I always, I have one or two in my 13 years as a state senator where I'm like, I could have gone either way. And it was very equal, the number of emails I was getting on the issue. And I live with that vote that I took in specifically on that bill. And, and when there's feedback coming back on the implementation of that bill, because you have to now execute, I always remember that day and why I voted. I mean, sometimes it is half and half of the emails you're getting from your constituents. and then you just go and take that vote. So I always tell people if they don't like that legislator, then they don't vote for that legislator. So that's a valid point also to remember, but it could happen, definitely.
The one thing I'll say about that is to say that the majority of your constituents feel this way on this issue. I'd love to know where they're getting that detailed polling information about my specific constituents, because it's one thing for a local polling organization or news media organization to have a broad poll such as, would you like to pay lower taxes? And they say yes. And we had this tax bill, I guess it was last year, that was very controversial related to the food tax. And it was a very complicated bill. And while it was a net tax cut, it raised taxes on food. And that was a good example of, people don't want their taxes on food raised. Well, there was an overall tax cut. And so it's easy to say, well, the poll shows your constituents don't want food tax. I'm like, but it also says that they want lower taxes and a more stable budget. I didn't end up voting for that one. And that one was hard because I actually thought, from a policy perspective, there were some good things in the bill. But at the end of the day, I was like, the constituent outcry is too loud. Another example would be some of the initiatives that have passed. There was one of the initiatives where the groups that drafted it started with an outdated section of code. And erroneously, that ballot initiative eliminated a significant source of funding for Medicaid. So when sometimes people say, well, why did you vote to, amend that bill? And I said, why did you vote to take away Medicaid from disabled individuals? And I didn't. I'm like, yeah, it was in there. I mean, it's not that part we can't debate. If we want to look at the code sections that were wrong, we can do that. And so, that's why, we spend an immense amount of time digging into the details. And you might like 90% of a bill, but there's a 10% poison pill in there that either needs to be amended. And if that's fixed, then you can vote for it. So it's a lot more complex, I find, typically, all your constituents want this, because one thing I know for certain is that all of my constituents don't agree on any one subject. So we take it a bill at a time and we do our best. And at the end of the day, we have to, at least in the House, reapply every other year for our job. Senators have it a lot easier. It's every 4 years. But anyway, that's my insights on that.
And thank both of you. We've only got almost a couple minutes left, or maybe a minute. So first of all, I want to thank both of you for taking part in this workshop today, getting to know your legislator and how to approach that legislator. There's some great questions I wish we could get to. This next one would take we could take a number of minutes. Let me just throw it out quick. Is there a conflict of interest by having people whose personal wealth is built by participating in development and housing industry also involved in affordable housing and homeless resources? Just briefly, we're all required to vote. Everybody has conflicts of interest. If you're a teacher, you're voting on educational increase funding. That's kind of just inherent in the legislative process. We may have even some different opinions here today between us three, but that would be probably a 5 or 10 minute discussion. So anyway, we're out of time now. We appreciate every one of you that have joined here today. We appreciate the questions. Build a relationship, get to know your legislator the best way you can. And sometimes that will require some creativity. So again, thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of our conference.
Thank you.